The cardiac cycle refers to the sequence of events that occur and repeat with every heartbeat. It can be divided into two major phases, systole and diastole, each of which subdivides into several smaller phases. Systole and diastole, when not specified otherwise, refer to ventricular contraction and relaxation, respectively. Reminders: blood flows from higher to lower pressure. Contraction increases the pressure within a chamber, while relaxation lowers the pressure. AV valves open when atrial pressures are higher than ventricular pressures and close when the pressure gradient is reversed. Similarly, semilunar valves open when ventricular pressures are higher than aortic pulmonary pressures and close when the reverse is true. The cycle is initiated with the firing of the SA node that stimulates the atria to depolarize. This is represented by the P wave on the ECG. Atrial contraction starts shortly after the P wave begins and causes the pressure within the atria to increase, forcing blood into the ventricles. Atrial contraction, however, only accounts for a fraction of ventricular filling, because at this point the ventricles are already almost full due to passive blood flow down the ventricles through the open AV valves. As atrial contraction completes, atrial pressure begins to fall, reversing the pressure gradient across the AV valves, causing them to close. The closing of the AV valves produces the first heart sound, S1, and marks the beginning of systole. At this point, ventricular depolarization, represented by the QRS complex, is halfway through, and the ventricles start to contract, rapidly building up pressures inside the ventricles. For a moment, however, the semilunar valves remain closed, and the ventricles contract within a closed space. This phase is referred to as isovolumetric contraction because no blood is ejected and ventricular volume is unchanged. Ventricular ejection starts when ventricular pressures exceed the pressures within the aorta and pulmonary artery. The aortic and pulmonic valves open, and blood is ejected out of the ventricles. This is the rapid ejection phase. As ventricular repolarization, reflected by the T wave, begins, ventricular pressure starts to fall, and the force of ejection is reduced. When ventricular pressures drop below aortic and pulmonary pressures, the semilunar valves close, marking the end of systole and beginning of diastole. Closure of semilunar valves produces the second heart sound, S2. The first part of diastole is, again, isovolumetric, as the ventricles relax with all valves closed. Ventricular pressure drops rapidly, but their volumes remain unchanged. Meanwhile, the atria are being filled with blood and atrial pressures rise slowly. Ventricular filling starts when ventricular pressures drop below atrial pressures, causing the AV valve to open, allowing blood to flow down the ventricles passively. The atria contract to finish the filling phase, and the cycle repeats itself.
Cardiac cycle. Definition: the cardiac cycle refers to the sequence of events that occur in one complete heartbeat. It includes contraction, systole, and relaxation, diastole, of both atria and ventricles, ensuring blood circulation throughout the body. परिभाषा: हृदय चक्र वह क्रम होता है जिसमें हृदय एक संपूर्ण धड़कन के दौरान संकुचित और शिथिल डायस्टोल होता है, जिससे रक्त पूरे शरीर में संचारित होता है. Phases of the cardiac cycle, hृदयचक्र चरण. 1. Atrial systole, atrial systole. Atria contract, pushing blood into the ventricles. Ventricles are in a relaxed state, ventricular diastole. Atrioventricular valves remain open, while semilunar valves are closed. Duration to 0.1 seconds. 2. Ventricular systole, nili systole. Ventricles contract, forcing blood into the pulmonary artery and aorta. AV valves close to prevent backflow. Semilunar valves open, duration 0.3 seconds. 3. Complete cardiac diastole, pura hridi vishranti. Both atria and ventricles are relaxed. Blood flows from veins into atria. AV valves open, allowing passive filling of ventricles. Duration 0.4 seconds. Total duration of cardiac cycle 0.8 seconds. At an average heart rate of 75 beats per minute, one cardiac cycle takes 0.8 seconds to complete. Diagram of cardiac cycle, Hrudi Chekarka Chittar. I cannot directly create diagrams here, but you can refer to textbooks or request an illustration. However, I can describe how to draw it. 1. Label the 4 chambers: right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. 2. Show the direction of blood flow using arrows. 3. Indicate the opening and closing of valves, AV valves and semilunar valves. 4. Mark the phases, atrial systole, ventricular systole, diastole. Would you like me to generate a diagram for you? Detailed anatomical diagram of the cardiac cycle, showing the different phases, atrial systole, ventricular systole, and diastole. The diagram should label the 4 chambers of the heart: right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, and the major valves, atrioventricular valves, semilunar valves. Arrows should indicate the direction of blood flow. The diagram should be clear and educational, suitable for learning purposes.